In this episode, we begin with a topic that sits right at the center of modern defensive work, because standardizing and automating security processes is really about helping teams do important tasks in a reliable way instead of depending on memory, improvisation, or luck. For a new learner, this can sound like a subject meant only for engineers or managers, but it actually matters to anyone who wants to understand how security work becomes repeatable, scalable, and trustworthy. A process is simply a defined way of doing something, and in cybersecurity that might include investigating alerts, reviewing suspicious logins, escalating incidents, validating changes, or responding to a suspected phishing message. Standardization means those tasks are performed using a consistent method, while automation means certain steps can be handled by systems rather than people doing everything by hand every time. Together, those ideas help organizations reduce mistakes, respond faster, and create a more stable security program that does not fall apart every time workload increases or a key employee is out of the office. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good starting point is understanding why security work often becomes inconsistent when it is not standardized. Two analysts may receive the same alert and handle it in very different ways, even when both are talented and well-intentioned. One may gather complete context, document the case carefully, and escalate at the right time, while the other may miss an important clue, skip a validation step, or close the case too early because the process exists mostly in memory rather than in a clear workflow. That inconsistency creates risk because security outcomes should not depend heavily on who happens to be on shift or how tired they are when the alert arrives. Standardization reduces that variability by defining what must happen, what information should be collected, what criteria should trigger escalation, and what documentation is required before a task is considered complete. This does not remove professional judgment, but it creates a stronger foundation for that judgment, which is one reason mature security teams care so much about process discipline. Standardization also matters because cybersecurity work is rarely isolated. A suspicious event may begin with one analyst, move to a more experienced reviewer, then reach incident response, management, legal, or another technical team, depending on what is discovered. If everyone describes events differently, stores information in inconsistent ways, or follows different steps based on personal habit, the handoff becomes slower and more error-prone. Important details can be lost, duplicated, or misunderstood. A standardized process makes collaboration easier because the people involved know what the record should contain, how severity is determined, when containment is considered, and what criteria move a case from one stage to another. This is especially important in a security operations center, SOC, where shift changes, alert volume, and time pressure make clear structure even more valuable. The stronger the process, the less the team must rely on guesswork during stressful moments, and the easier it becomes to maintain continuity when multiple people or teams touch the same security event over time. Once the idea of standardization makes sense, automation becomes easier to understand as the next logical step rather than as a separate magical capability. Automation means that once a process is defined well enough, some of its repeated steps can be handled by systems in a controlled way. That might include gathering alert context, enriching a case with threat information, checking whether a suspicious address appears elsewhere in logs, creating a ticket, sending a notification, or assigning the event to the right queue based on clear conditions. The important lesson for beginners is that automation works best after standardization, not before it. If a team does not actually agree on what the process should be, automating it only makes confusion happen faster. A broken process that runs automatically is still a broken process. Strong automation begins with a task that is well understood, repeated often, and defined clearly enough that a system can perform part of it consistently without introducing more uncertainty than it removes. This leads to one of the biggest misconceptions in the topic, which is the idea that automation is mainly about replacing people. In real security operations, the more practical goal is usually to remove repetitive work so people can spend more time on the parts of the job that require judgment, skepticism, and contextual thinking. A system may be very good at pulling records from several data sources, checking known conditions, and organizing evidence into a case quickly. It is usually much less trustworthy when the situation is ambiguous, the business context is unusual, or the potential impact of a wrong decision is high. That is why good automation often supports human defenders rather than displacing them. It gives them cleaner starting points, faster access to context, and more consistent case preparation. In that sense, automation is a force multiplier. It helps skilled analysts spend less time copying data, repeating routine validation steps, or doing the same administrative work again and again, and more time evaluating what the evidence actually means. A useful way to think about the relationship between standardization and automation is through the idea of process maturity. At a low level of maturity, the team reacts to events with a great deal of improvisation, and outcomes depend heavily on individual memory and experience. At a more mature level, the team has defined workflows for common tasks, knows what data should be reviewed, and documents actions in a consistent way. At a still higher level, the organization can automate parts of those workflows because the decision points and required actions are sufficiently clear. Maturity is important because security teams often want the speed of automation before they have built the discipline required to support it. When that happens, they may automate too much too early, apply logic that is too broad, or create workflows that no one fully understands once they are running at scale. Mature teams move more carefully. They first make repeated work consistent, then automate narrow parts of it, validate the result, and expand only when the process proves dependable. One of the clearest places this topic appears in daily operations is alert triage. If every incoming alert is handled with a different checklist, a different naming scheme, and a different standard for severity, the team will struggle to compare cases, report trends, and train new analysts effectively. A standardized triage process defines what counts as enough evidence for escalation, what context must be gathered first, how cases are labeled, and when the event should be closed or passed forward. Automation can then help by attaching asset details, recent related events, user context, or known external threat information to the case as soon as it enters the workflow. That makes triage faster and more consistent without skipping the analyst's role in deciding whether the alert really matters. Over time, this also improves quality because the team can look back and see whether similar alerts were handled in similar ways. When that consistency exists, managers can identify real gaps, improve decision logic, and strengthen the workflow rather than trying to untangle a different approach for every individual analyst. Phishing response is another example that makes the value of this subject easy to picture. Many organizations receive a steady stream of suspicious email reports from users, and handling those reports one by one in a purely manual way can quickly consume analyst time. A standardized process might define what evidence to capture, how to assess whether the message is malicious, when to search for the same message elsewhere, and what conditions justify broader action. Automation can support that process by gathering message metadata, comparing the sender or domain to known intelligence, checking whether other inboxes received similar messages, and creating a case with the basic context already assembled. The analyst still determines the meaning of the results, especially when the case is borderline or sensitive, but the repeated collection work no longer needs to be done from scratch every time. This is a perfect illustration of the broader principle. Standardization creates repeatability, and automation reduces friction inside that repeatable framework without removing thoughtful human review from the steps that matter most. Another area where standardization and automation matter is incident escalation and communication. When a case becomes serious, delays often happen not because the technical team lacks skill, but because no one is fully aligned on who must be notified, what threshold defines a major event, what information leadership needs first, or how the case should be documented as it evolves. A standardized escalation process helps solve that problem by making expectations clear before the pressure arrives. It defines when the incident changes status, who receives notice, what basic facts must be confirmed before communication goes out, and what cadence is expected for updates. Automation can then support those steps by opening the right case type, notifying designated teams, tracking status transitions, or reminding responders when an update window is approaching. This does not replace sound leadership or investigation discipline, but it reduces the chance that operational chaos will be made worse by inconsistent communication. In security, timing matters, and well-structured processes make fast response more realistic. Standardization also supports metrics, which are difficult to trust when teams perform the same type of work in inconsistent ways. If one analyst closes a case as benign while another uses a different label for a nearly identical outcome, reporting becomes distorted. If some cases include complete timelines and others contain only fragments, leadership will struggle to understand real workload, recurring issues, or where delays occur. Standardized processes improve the quality of metrics because they create shared definitions for case stages, outcomes, severity, and completion. Once that foundation is in place, automation can help collect timing data, count recurring event types, track escalation trends, and measure how long certain steps take across the workflow. This is important because improvement depends on visibility. An organization cannot fix bottlenecks it cannot see clearly. Reliable measurement begins with reliable process execution, and reliable process execution becomes much easier when the task is standardized first and then supported with automation that records the same important details each time. Another valuable benefit is training and team growth. New analysts often struggle not because they lack intelligence, but because experienced teams carry too much process knowledge informally in conversations, habits, and unwritten expectations. That creates a steep learning curve and makes onboarding slower than it needs to be. A standardized workflow gives new staff a clearer path into the job because they can see how a case moves, what information matters first, what questions should be asked, and when escalation is appropriate. Automation strengthens that learning by presenting the same types of context, fields, and task sequences in a predictable way. A beginner who repeatedly sees a case enriched with the same categories of useful information will gradually understand what experienced analysts look for and why. This does not remove the need for mentoring, but it makes mentoring more effective because the process itself reinforces the expected approach. In that way, standardization and automation do not just improve operations. They also help build stronger teams by turning good practice into something visible and teachable. As organizations mature further, they often connect workflows across different systems so repeated tasks can move more efficiently between detection, case handling, intelligence, and reporting. This is where application programming interface, API, connections, and security orchestration, automation, and response, SOAR, concepts often enter the conversation, though the beginner's goal is simply to understand the function rather than the technical setup. The organization wants systems to exchange information in structured ways so analysts do not need to re-enter the same data repeatedly or manually copy evidence from one place to another. A suspicious alert may enter through a security information and event management (SIEM) platform, be enriched with intelligence, create a case, and trigger defined review steps without requiring several separate manual handoffs. The deeper lesson is that automation becomes most powerful when it reduces unnecessary movement of data and repetitive handling of the same information. But it remains valuable only when the underlying process stays understandable, documented, and controlled rather than becoming a black box no one can explain. At the same time, there are real risks when teams standardize too rigidly or automate too aggressively. A process can become so mechanical that analysts stop thinking critically and simply follow the workflow even when the case does not fit. An automated action can move too quickly and create business disruption if the underlying logic is weak or the evidence is incomplete. Overstandardization can also leave too little room for exceptions, unusual cases, or legitimate differences between environments and business units. That is why mature security programs treat standardization as guidance for common work, not as a trap that forbids thinking. They also treat automation as something that should be tested, reviewed, and expanded carefully. Low risk, high volume, repetitive tasks are usually the best candidates to automate first. High impact actions with uncertain evidence often need more human review. The best balance is not maximum automation. It is appropriate automation, built on processes clear enough to support speed without sacrificing accuracy, context, or accountability. The broader connection across all of this is resilience. A resilient security program is not one that depends on heroic effort from a few experts every single day. It is one that can perform important work consistently under pressure, absorb staff turnover, handle increased volume, and still preserve enough quality to make sound decisions. Standardizing and automating security processes help build that kind of resilience because they reduce randomness, preserve institutional knowledge, and create a structure that works even when the environment becomes busy or stressful. Analysts still matter enormously, but their value shifts toward analysis, interpretation, and judgment instead of constant manual repetition. This is one of the most practical lessons for a CSA Plus learner. Security success is not only about having clever tools or smart people. It is also about whether the organization can do the right things in the right order, repeatedly, under pressure, and with enough consistency that the results can be trusted across time and across teams. By the end of this discussion, standardizing and automating security processes should feel less like an abstract management topic and more like a practical foundation for good defensive work. Standardization helps teams perform common tasks consistently, communicate more clearly, measure more accurately, and train people more effectively. Automation builds on that foundation by letting systems handle repeated, well-defined steps so analysts can work faster and focus on the parts of the job that require real judgment. Together, these ideas improve speed, quality, scale, and resilience, but only when they are applied thoughtfully and in the right order. For someone preparing for CSA+, the key takeaway is that mature security operations do not rely on improvisation alone. They define important work clearly, make it repeatable, and automate carefully where repetition creates friction. Once you understand that pattern, you begin to see how strong security programs stay effective even as complexity and alert volume continue to grow.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.